So you have your internal voice and your external voice. Your internal voice is, it's basically, it's your ability to sing through your instrument. Ideas that are in your head. Sometimes what happens, a lot of times what happens with players is they may have a perfect idea, but when they try to get it to come out of their instrument, the sound of the instrument becomes louder than the sound of the idea. And so then, we kind of play things that are based on this, the sound of the saxophone as opposed to the sound of the idea, the originally conceived idea. And so we either just miss the boat and can't play the idea at all, or we will revert to finger patterns or things that we already are familiar with instead of actually improvising. So this becomes kind of spontaneous regurgitation rather than spontaneous improvisation. Okay. So the way to overcome that problem is by and to turn up the volume on the sound of your idea is by mastering the instrument. Okay, so so that's why we practice scales, rudiments, different patterns, even working on things like 2-5-1 patterns and turnarounds and all that kind of stuff is for that reason, is to master the instrument. Now, sometimes what teachers will do, and it's a lot easier to make the students sound sound like they're more experienced than they are, is by just giving them some particular licks or patterns and tell them where to play them, and just play them in those situations, and then it'll sound like they're more experienced than they are. Well, until you listen to them play for very long, and then they start repeating themselves, and they don't really have anything new to say. They're not really being conversational. They're just basically playing the same thing over and over because that's the only thing that they can play, that kind of thing. So that's not my goal. My goal is not to make you sound like me, but to make you sound like you. Okay? What you sound like in your head. Okay? And we all know that we all have ideas in our head that don't come out of our instrument. So that's the whole point of mastering the instrument, is so that we can play those ideas that are in our head. That's why else practice? That's the only thing that makes any sense. So we spend all that time practicing, so we can get those ideas to come out of our instrument. Now, say for instance, if I've totally mastered my instrument, but when I play with anyone else, nothing I play has anything to do with what they're playing. It wouldn't sound very conversational. It would sound like noise, wouldn't it? It would be kind of like, if I was a French scholar and you were a Spanish linguistic scholar, we're both linguistic scholars, and I've got 20,000 word vocabulary, you got a 30,000 word vocabulary, and neither one of us are limited at all by our language. But the problem is if we ever got together to talk about something, it wouldn't matter how many words we had together in our own language. We'd have to devise a vocabulary or a body of commonality so that we can have conversations. Okay, and that's the second category. That's your external voice. External voice is the stuff that's happening outside of you. It's the stuff that it takes your ear to discern. Okay, and a good combination of vocabulary from a particular tradition of music. We're talking about jazz improvisation here, so probably the tradition of music is probably going to be jazz, right? That's where, so, we're not just talking about spontaneous composition or just improvisation now. Now we're talking about jazz improvisation, okay? And frankly, rock and roll, although rock and roll and rhythm and blues and gospel and everything are heavily jazz influenced, and vice versa. If I'm playing on a rock and roll gig, I'm not going to play the same things as I play on a traditional jazz gig, unless I don't care if I sound authentic or not. If I don't care if I sound authentic, then I might play whatever I want to play. I might play a language that totally no one knows what's going on. Of course, I'm not going to get any gigs that way, right? So you have to be able to play within the tradition that you're, that you're playing in. You have to be able to improvise within that tradition. So with jazz, when we're talking about developing a vocabulary, we're talking about developing a more sophisticated jazz vocabulary, so that when you listen to other people, when they play something, you can relate to what they played, and then you can play something that complements what they played, as opposed to being locked into only playing things that you feel comfortable with. Okay, I can play this, but if I try to get outside of that, I'm messed up. It's because you're not, you may have mastered your instrument, but it doesn't matter because you can't hear what's going on. Bottom line is, if you can't play your instrument and you can't hear, then you can't play jazz. It's just that simple. So those end up being the two most important areas to focus on. So everything that we work on, everything in here is going to be about playing your instrument better, and then also about learning to hear better and relate to what's being played, so that you can play things that are appropriate and sound conversational. Here's something that happens very oftentimes, right? In marriage counseling. Okay, marriage counseling. Okay. Gotta use my marriage counseling example here. Illustration. In marriage counseling, you got in marriage counseling, you have Tom and Susie. Okay, Tom and Susie, and then you have the counselor, and the counselor says to Susie, "Tell Tom how it feels when Sunday all you do is sit in front of that big HD TV, the 50-inch HD TV plasma 1080p with a 120 hertz refresh rate, and it's just terrible." So Susie starts telling me, "Oh, it's just terrible. You ignore me, and that's all you pay attention to. It's like I don't exist, right?" And then the counselor says to Tom, "Okay, repeat back what she just said." And of course, other than 50-inch HD TV plasma, 120 hertz refresh rate, 1080p. That's probably the only thing that he says correctly that she actually said. Everything else is maybe a broken paraphrase. And so the point is that in order to improve communication, you have to be able to literally repeat back exactly what was just played, or what was just said. I know you know somebody that you have a conversation with them, and it seems like you're getting along fine, and then they just say something way out in left field that has nothing to do with what you're talking about. You can't follow. It's like, wow, where are you at? Come back home. If that happens too often, pretty soon you probably don't want to talk to them that much anymore. It's because it doesn't seem like they're paying any attention to you. So how did you just say that? That doesn't have anything to do with what I'm talking about. Well, if truth be known, that's what a large portion of people that improvise on jazz, quote unquote, sound like. If you could hear them with the ears of a person that understands the language like you understand the English language, then it would sound like, a lot of times it would seem like that guy that gets on your nerves, that talks way out in left field, and then you talk and you're still saying the same thing, then he says something way out in left field that has nothing to do with what you said. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important to be able to totally repeat back exactly what was just played. Shouldn't matter what key it's in, shouldn't matter what tempo it's in, doesn't matter. Okay? If that's not a skill that you have, then it has to be a skill that is a priority to develop. That's why a lot of jazz musicians transcribe. Is to get more familiar with not only the vocabulary, building your vocabulary, but more familiar with the ability to just repeat back exactly what was said.